powers of attorney too.
That I believe.
Anytime you're ready.
The only thing that I'm concerned about.
Alrighty, welcome to the October 25th, 2022 regular Board of Education meeting, and we'll start off with a roll call from Ms. Hess.
Mrs. Bukta,
Here.
Mr. Rogers,
Here.
Mrs. Selly,
Here.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Here.
Mr. Nickram.
Here. And we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Alrighty, and with every board meeting, we start off by reading the vision and mission statement. The vision statement reads, achieving distinction in all that we do. And mission is cultivate an inclusive, high-performing culture of growth and community. All right, moving on to the comments from the audience. If you choose to make a comment for the audience, please limit it to 3 minutes. And approach the podium, state your name and address, and we'll move forward from there. Does anyone have any comments tonight?
So our speaker, Mr. Fatt.
Okay. I had a couple conversations with people in the school. My daughter approached me. She's been put in a very uncomfortable situation in the school. Was wondering if the board's been aware of this uncomfortable situation. No? Okay. Has to do with male versus female. What are we gonna do with the male and female bathrooms? My daughter's been in the bathroom and there's a male going in the bathroom. Now, I understand that society says you can claim whatever you want. So tonight, I could claim I'm a female, go into the female bathroom, and there isn't a darn thing you can say about it. Now, what are we gonna do about it? You guys are trying to pass a $22 million referendum for school safety. You're gonna lock my daughter in that school in a very unsafe situation. Now, what can my daughter, there's two questions. What can my daughter do? And what can she carry to feel safe? Because she does not feel safe in the situation. I waited 3 weeks before I called the school to find out what was going to be done, and they said there's nothing that can be done. Now, I understand socially, this stuff is a nightmare, but something needs to be done about this. Now, I don't know what to do. Right now, if I could afford it, I'd pull my kid out of the school instantly. Put her someplace where they would solve this issue. Now, if it's not gonna be solved, I don't know, we're gonna have to look at other options. So, that's it. I thought I'd bring it up. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alrighty, do we have any other additional comments for tonight's board meeting? Alrighty, moving on to the consent agenda, Dr. Abbott.
Yes, as we're aware, Robert's rules provide for a consent agenda listing several items for approval of the board in a single motion. Documentation concerning these items have been provided to all board members in advance to assure an extensive and thorough review and will then become part of the permanent record. Items may be removed from the consent agenda at the request of any board member. This evening, you have item A, minutes from September 15, 2022 regular meeting. We have no item B for personnel. Item C, approval of stipend for board secretary. Item D, the first read of board policy 31.2, an update. Item E, youth options progress report, Start College Now and early college credit program requests. Item F, foreign travel, Ireland 2024. Item G, gifts to the district, which this evening include a donation from the Kiwanis Club of Fort Atkinson of $1,000 to pay for clothes and school supplies for students. Also a donation from Green Bay, Wisconsin Packaging Division of $500 to pay for clothes and school supplies for students. Also a donation from American Legion Auxiliary Post 166 of 35 blessing bags with an approximate value of $500 for families in need in our district. Also a donation from TopCon Ag America of 24 pallets of wood with an estimated value of $24,547. And then a donation from an anonymous donor in the amount of $500 to the Berry Elementary Physical Education Department. And then item H, payment of district bills and the treasurer's report.
Thank you. Are you any board member like to pull any specific item out for further discussion at all?
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented here today.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Rogers, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Bookta,
Yes.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mrs. Selly,
Yes.
Mr. Nickram.
Yes. All righty, thank you for that. And moving on to the instruction part of the agenda tonight.
Yes, item A is the 2022-23 academic and career plan. Before you, and in board packet, which is available to the public, you have the annual academic career plan that the board needs to review to ensure that School District of Fort Atkinson is providing academic and career planning services to pupils enrolled in grades 6 through 12. The academic career plan refers to both the progress that helps students engage in academic and career development activities, as well as a portfolio product that is created and maintained for the student's academic, career, and personal advancement. Our district uses a product called Zello that is a platform to introduce students to this learning and manage and maintain their portfolio throughout high school. Again, the complete report is available to the public on the website, and the board has reviewed this prior to the meeting.
All righty. Thank you, Dr. Abbott. And obviously, that's been on board docs for all of us to review beforehand, and I'm sure all of us had the opportunity to do so. So, is there any further discussion on instruction part of the agenda tonight? Okay. And we will need a motion.
Be it resolved that the Board of Education approve the 2022-23 academic and career plan.
I'll second. Second.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Bookta, a second by Ms. Reynolds. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? All righty. Thank you. And moving on to the non-instruction part of the agenda. Dr. Abbott?
Yes, this evening we have the district technology report. Our technology director, DJ Scullen, will provide that report this evening.
All right, great. So thank you for having me. We had another busy year in the diverse world of technology, but the good news is that this last year had a seemingly normal feel to it. But one of the unfortunate results of schools across the country going virtual was it exposed how vulnerable some schools were to cyber attacks. Janesville, Neenah, Black River Falls, all were hit with ransomware. Many of them had to close school for a period of time. Most recently, notably, was the Los Angeles Unified District. So for a better portion of the last year, our team sort of switched gears to put extra attention towards our cybersecurity posture. The good news is that we weren't alone. Since K-12 is part of the Department of Homeland Security's critical infrastructure providers, we have access to free of charge Wisconsin Cyber Resilience Team. We signed up for an on-site cyber resilience review. It took 9 hours to complete, considered of roughly 300 questions. My team, Dr. Abbott and Mr. Demarath were a part of that, and it was intense. But they reviewed 10 domains, such as asset management, control management, vulnerability, incident risk, and down the line. It produced a 134-page report that gave us a roadmap. I said it was intense, and what I mean by that is the questions that they were asking us were the same questions that they'd be asking other critical infrastructure providers, such as like military bases and nuclear power plants and such like that. And given the influx in cyber attacks, most insurance companies were requiring what's called multi-factor authentication or two-factor in certain systems. If you've got an online bank, you probably know what it is. It's not that new anymore, but we chuckled at one of the insurance providers' slides that said, enabling multi-factor is easy. It takes 15 minutes, and clearly they're not a technical person. But at the end of last year, we rolled out multi-factor to all staff, and it was quite a monumental task that I credit Mr. Joel Kaiser, my systems administrator, for. And doing it at the end of last year made for a very, very smooth start of this year, given that it had been practiced and done throughout the end of the year and throughout the summer. In the realm of cybersecurity, we continue to do our simulated phishing campaigns. So all of our staff and high school students get fake phishing emails from us every month. We track who correctly identifies those emails and reports them versus failing and clicking on the links. I'm really, really pleased that with the increased awareness of our staff over time, when we started, we had something like 26% falling for it and clicking on the phishing emails. And now we're down to 4%, which is well below the industry standard of, or industry level of 11%. The Emergency Connectivity Fund is a $7 billion program funded by the American Rescue Plan of 2021 to help schools and libraries support remote learning and close the homework gap. We, as well as many other schools across Wisconsin and the country, took advantage of those funds, and we secured things like Chromebooks for our students. There's a pile of them up at the high school library. We got some laptops for our staff. Those just arrived a couple weeks ago, so we're getting those all set up. We got hotspots for families in need of internet access outside of school. And one of the more exciting things that we're in the process of rolling out is Wi-Fi on all of our school buses, which is pretty cool. What better time to do some homework on those multi-hour trips to sporting events? I will add that we had the option to pay extra for all this stuff, to unbox it, configure, and deploy it for us, but we opted against that. We did it all in-house. And a shout out to Miss Amanda Mailing, my administrative assistant, for her help with all the federal paperwork required to secure these funds. And also Mr. Zach Niger, he did the bulk of the quite literal heavy lifting of this gear. And speaking of heavy things, Mr. Niger needed to lift. Another thing we did over the summer was finish the install of our interactive TVs in every classroom. An interactive TV is basically a giant tablet at the front of the room that teachers can annotate with and interact with. And we bought about 130 of them, again, opting out for paying extra to have them installed for us. Did it ourselves. So a big credit to the team on this one. These TVs have been really well received by our teachers and staff. If you ever wonder how we get the internet into our schools, we don't just run a telephone wire from the nearest pole into the building and call it a day. We actually own our own fiber that's buried in conduit underground. So using another federal funding source called E-Rate, we secured funds to complete our self-provisioned fiber network and connect our remaining 2 buildings, Luther and Purdy, up to the network. Here's some photos of that. It's an underground boring machine. That's the conduit underground. And the FASTER network, it's a partnership between the district and the city of Fort Atkinson. It's a fiber optic community network that connects buildings and people and strategies. And while we're on the topic of fiber and partnerships, the district, city of Fort, Jefferson County, and Edge Broadband, we jointly applied for the Wisconsin Public Service Commission's Broadband Expansion Grant. It's meant to fund internet initiatives in unserved and underserved areas of Wisconsin. In our application, we emphasized the great deal of internet inequities in rural Fort Atkinson. We have data from our families. We know where the internet isn't and where it just doesn't work well enough to support modern needs, such as running a home business or learning from home or telehealth and telemedicine. And I was very, very pleased to learn just in June that we won our grant application and secured nearly $2 million to run fiber to every rural home within our school district's boundaries. I heard from Mr. Madel, the president of Edge Broadband, just last week, and he's lining up contractors and securing materials, finalizing the engineering, and he's going to begin on the south side of town just this winter, and then the north side he'll be beginning in spring. And this is like really, really great news for our learning community. The last accomplishment that I'd like to mention was with the Dwight Foster Public Library. I think the idea came from a discussion with Dr. Abbott at a library board meeting about how few Fort Atkinson students actually had public library patron accounts, which is a process of a visit to the library and collecting demographic information and then the issuance of cards and da-da-da-da-da. The district basically collects all of the information the library would need during our school registration each year. All we would need to do is ask the parents if they want their kids to have a library card, and then we could just securely beam that data from our system over to the libraries, and then it's done. So we tweaked our registration form, asking the parents permission that we could share that data with the library. They're already entering the information for their kids. And we had over 1,100 kids opt in by their parents, and then the library had said that they had, of those kids, they had 733 were unique and new to their system, and they were issuing cards. It was a really cool project, and kind of, quite frankly, it was pretty easy to implement. It just took a few people to ask, I wonder if it's possible too, and we love questions like that in IT. I think it's in our fabric to find efficient solutions to seemingly complicated problems. So thanks for the chance to highlight some of the milestones of the tech department. I'm incredibly, incredibly grateful for my team, Amanda, Zach, and Joel. Shout out to the librarians and their help with the building level technical needs. And we look forward to this next year's challenges and successes and partnerships. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. It was really well done. Just real quick, going back to the phishing rate, what type of strategies do you deploy to get down to incredibly low rate of 4%?
So every month we send about 2 or 3 phishing emails to every single staff member and student, anything from like, hey, a package was left at your doorstep, click here to verify it, and then we give specific instructions on what to look for, like who is it actually from? Is it from UPS or is it from upssss.com?
Sure.
And then if they actually do fall for it, they get enrolled in a very, very short training program that kind of talks them through about basic internet safety.
Sure. And obviously, since we're clicking on less, I could presume that we're having less infractions on phishing emails, I would presume, right?
Absolutely. And what's great is people have the ability to look at an email and say, and flag it as like, I think this is phishing.
Yeah.
And if it's one of our benign campaigns, it just says, yep, got it, nailed it, nice job, on with your day. But if it's actually one that's a threat or something that we don't know about, it pings my team to investigate, and then we can look at that email and we can proactively block that sender from like reaching other staff,
Sure.
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Thank you.
And just to point out that is the weak link for organizations as far as cyber attacks. I mean, it is user use, so it has been very effective.
So I have a question. Well, first I want to, say thank you. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and I appreciate all the improvements. Do you feel with all these improvements that the district staff and our students are well positioned at this point in terms of technology, or is there, what next would you want to do? I mean, or you feel really comfortable with where we are?
I'm never perfectly comfortable with where we are. In terms of cyber, we're learning that you can stand up at cyber resilience. You can stand up as many stop guards to keep people out. But what you really need to do to be ready is to have logging measures in place that allow you to do forensics when weird things happen on your system. So that's sort of the next step in terms of our cyber posture. In terms of what we have for kids, I feel, pretty good about what we have. We have a decent wireless infrastructure. I think one thing that we can continue to grow on is teaching our kids how to be safe citizens of the internet.
I did have a couple questions about the grant that you worked with Edge Broadband. So you said that they're going to start, what are they going to initially do? Like actually bring cable to, the fiber optic cables to different families' homes? And is that going to be like for the entire district, or is it individual? How's that going to work?
So the grant only funds outside of Fort Atkinson. So the state has maps, and they think that within the city limits of Fort Atkinson, like we've got Charter, we've got AT&T, we've got
Right.
basically high-speed internet. So the funding is specifically for rural, but what they will be doing is they will be boring underground and putting little boxes outside of homes and a flyer that says if you want fiber internet to your home, here's how you sign up. So they will be constructing a network out.
Gotcha.
Out
And
of
you
Fort.
said the south side is going to start,
Yeah, I saw, south side.
that's really cool. So that's how families are going to know if they, if they want that, they can get it that way.
It's targeting thousands of homes, so yeah, they'll see construction happening, outside their door, and I guess they move pretty quick.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting.
Yes.
Just a question, how many hotspots have you distributed this year?
Oh, gosh, so when back in 2020, we had purchased, I don't know, close to 150, which seemed to be enough for families. Now, obviously, that is tapered off. I don't know exactly how many, but it's not nearly that much. So we certainly suspend the service on them, so we're not paying for them while they're not being used. But we have plenty, so families are encouraged if they have a need to check one out.
How do they do that?
They can check it out at the library. They can email student support at fortschools.org, which will generate a tech ticket for them, and we'll get back to you.
Awesome.
Just a question on their user emails. Now, are they able to create emails, their personal emails in school, or is it only specific for their user emails? And are those filtration systems that are for, security purposes all in place?
Yeah, so Fort School, students are issued Fort School's email addresses, and we have a great deal of control as to what can come in, what can go out. We monitor for things like self-harm and that sort of thing, which will notify certain school personnel, counselors, that sort of thing. In terms of a personal email address, we don't really have a way to stop a student from creating their own account and doing with it what they would like. But a part of that is the education that we want to bring is to safely using email, because it allows you to communicate with anyone,
But related to schoolwork and others, it's the district email account that is used by teachers in classrooms for assignments in Google Classroom and those types of things, correct?
Exact. Yep.
Thank you.
Well, these projects are enormous, and they got just a couple of minutes this evening, so thank you and your team for your inventiveness and creativity, as well as hard work in getting all of those done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very nice job.
Thank you.
Alrighty, moving on to the enrollment report. Dr. Abbott.
Yes, as DJ gets flipped over to this next presentation. As the board is aware, each year public schools take a count of students on the third Friday of September. These enrollment numbers directly impact school funding throughout the budget year, as well as a number of other school operations. Each year, public schools count their students on that third Friday of September to determine those enrollment numbers for per pupil state funding. The DPI uses a number of different calculations for a variety of different purposes. This evening, I will be looking at actual enrollment numbers, that is to say, actual students in actual classroom seats here in our school district. In overall physical count, we have been seeing an expected decline in actual enrollment for the past few years. And to be very clear, like a majority of public schools, we have known this enrollment decline was coming given census and other predictive information. Other neighboring school districts are seeing the same enrollment trends. As you will see this year, we are showing 75 fewer students from this year to last. Open enrollment is a mechanism that allows our resident students to apply to attend public schools in another school district or students from other districts to attend here in Fort Atkinson. State funds then travel with each student to the district where the student will attend school. Regarding our open enrollment, we continue to be on the upside, or we're up 36 students. Those are more students coming into our district than going out. This is an improvement over last year, and of course, we would like to see this number continue to grow in the future. I think it is most helpful to look at enrollment data through the lens of cohort groups. That is to say, the same group of students from one year to the next, and to get a sense of whether or not we have students coming in or if we're losing students from year to year. So this slide, as all, are available in the board packet and on our website. But this slide shows that while our total enrollment is down, as has been projected for many years, as I mentioned, given census and other data, we are not losing large groups of students once they are enrolled in our schools. This loss of students has been projected for many years, and some fluctuation in enrollment is to be expected as some people move into and away from our district or move into or out of our schools for other school options. Obviously, we are still seeing some impacts from COVID-19. Also, as we may have some smaller groups at the elementary level, currently our secondary numbers remain stable as our larger groups of students matriculate through each grade level. Our current second grade population, as reported last year, is at 121, significantly lower than years prior. We will continue to monitor this closely, as will other districts, to determine if this blip is of one class or if it's a larger trend in student enrollment. You'll also notice that our current kindergarten is at 149 and our 4K population is at 129. We believe we have students who will enroll in 5K programming next year who are not currently enrolled in 4K programming this year. We still have a number of families with students at home or parents who are working from home or have made some other choices regarding their 4-year-old students who we believe will be coming into our programming with fifth grade kindergarten. In contacting other districts, as I've mentioned, virtually all of them have seen a noticeably smaller student population in either current 4K or other early elementary grades. It is not a Fort Atkinson only phenomena. We are hearing that daycares and some of services that provide younger families yet have seen an uptick in business. So again, we'll be looking at trends over the next few years as to seeing what is a single incident or what may be a trend moving forward in the future. And obviously, we're monitoring carefully as the city is adding subdivisions on the other side of town to provide additional housing. So we will be vigilant in our 4- and 5-year-old kindergarten roundup, as we call it, in that orientation process. We moved that up to late winter and early spring, which was very effective for us last year and added a number of activities to engage students with our school district early in order to have them enrolled and know who those families will be heading into the next school year. So as we're aware, one of our main goals in this strategic plan is to be the preferred educational option in the region, as evidenced by annual growth in pupil count and open enrollment. So this evening you have our actual enrollment before you, and we are happy to see that we are up 36 students in open enrollment, or students who are choosing to come to our district rather than remaining in those that they currently reside in. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on enrollment.
It's more of a statement, but I appreciate the gap versus open enroll in versus open enroll out is continuing to go in our favor on that. So that is certainly a good sign for some of the steps that we've been taking in our strategic plan. So it's good to see on that.
Open enrollment occurs throughout the year. It used to be a once-a-year event. Mrs. Haas oversees open enrollment in and out, and it is an increasingly complicated and increasingly fluid situation as families move in and out of school districts.
Sure,
So.
absolutely. Does anyone have any further questions or comments tonight?
As we look at the enrollment, this is something that we've been looking at as far as trending for a while. I mean, and when just looking at those numbers, it seems like, you know, it's up at like every couple of years, there's a big class, and then there's not. Is that something that we've seen trend over, you know, the last couple of decades?
Perhaps just a reference back to my own experience in 23 years at the middle school. We always had years where we were up 30 or 40 kids as a 3-year institution, and other years that we were down the same amount, and they did sort of cycle through. So there were times when we were up significantly, or other times, and it did ebb and flow to some extent. That second grade year that we're referencing is an anomaly. That is not something that we've seen. Although, as I keep mentioning, other districts are seeing a similar phenomena in those early years. Whether it's exactly second grade or first grade kindergarten, there definitely was, or were rather, fewer children being born, it would seem, that are finding their way into schools in general. That seems to be switching itself around. But again, you know, looking at long-term trends, that single second grade is a low number for us compared to others.
So as we talk about enrollment decreases that are anticipated, and I'm just, because sometimes data being presented, I just want to kind of get the summary view. In terms of enrollment, you know, that trend is not as, there's a mass exodus of the district. It really is what people are seeing everywhere. And like you said, the census, I mean, I think they said this is the first time down in a century. But that's really where we're seeing that trend come from, is just lower number across.
It's birth rate more so than it is anything else. And in the second data slide I showed, you know, once we have kids, we tend to keep kids. So we're gradually adding kids, whether it's through open enrollment or coming from other schools, even in our geographical area coming in. We aren't seeing a large group or pocket of kids leaving to go elsewhere. You know, if that was the case, I think this would be a slightly different conversation. But again, once we have kids, you know, we have them coming in. And even that second grade we keep talking about is up 7 from last year. And while that's not a significant number, that is more than we had last year. And we're seeing that across the board, particularly at the higher grade levels as well.
Do we know if, like, for some of these that, the families that opt in, is there like specific reasons why they decided to choose us? Like, you know, our wonderful summer school program, or, you know, our athletics, or anything like that? Do we know?
So families are not required to provide a reason. Sometimes we are
Right.
made aware of them. Sometimes it is related to a specific program or offering. Sometimes it's related to logistics. A parent may be an employee of our school district, or may work at Fort Healthcare, or whatever the case might be. Other times there may have been issues in one school district and they're looking to go on to another, whether it was issues with a particular school or whatever the case might be. Those are, I mean, sort of often probably the handful of reasons that people most often share as far as coming in. Sometimes they come for a specific, you know, a specific employee or a specific school experience, or, you know, lineage, families that have experience in the district that are coming back. So it's really an array.
Okay.
All right. If there's no other further comments, we'll be moving on to sponsorship committee report. And I have a report on that. Over the past several months, the district sponsorship committee has worked to renew 3 sponsorships with local partners. These sponsorships include the renewal of the high school gymnasium sponsorship with Premier Bank. This sponsorship is for 10 years, totaling $94,000. The renewal of the high school strength and conditioning center with Space Saver, The sponsorship is for 5 years, totaling $17,500. The renewal of the school district Spirit debit card program with Badger Bank. The sponsorship is for 3 years and is based on per transaction amount. We would expect the sponsorship to net approximately $6,000 over 3 years. Altogether, these 3 sponsorships will bring in approximately $117,500 in new revenue to the district outside of our normal operating revenue sources. Over the past 10 years, our sponsorship program has secured almost $335,000 in funding for our district and provided visibility to many organizations in our community. In an effort to continue to increase interest in our sponsorship program, our communications director, Marissa Weidenfeller, updated our sponsorship guide to give it more contemporary one-foot look to provide up-to-date opportunities for organizations and individuals to consider to support our students. This refresh sponsorship guide can be found on our website at fortschools.org under the Community tab. Anyone interested in partnering with the district for any kind of sponsorship or partnership is encouraged to reach out to Ms. Weidenfeller to discuss the opportunities available that will mutually benefit the district and interested party through a creative partnership to support our students. Thank you to the sponsorship committee for the work in partnering with these local businesses to secure these additional funds to support our students. The members of this community include myself, Robin Silly, Jason Demrath, Marissa Weidenfelder, Becky Romans, and Lori Strom. Our athletic director, Steve Mahoney, was also instrumental in securing and implementing these partnerships. Any comments or questions on the sponsorship committee reports?
I just want to say fantastic job, Marissa. It looks amazing. And I know there's lots of hard work that's put into it. It looks super just easy to read through. And yeah, anybody who's watching the school board meeting and wants to be a sponsor, please do. I think it's a great opportunity to get exposure and to support the school district. So fantastic job for this really innovative idea.
Alrighty, we will move on to item D in non-instruction for authorization to dispose of equipment no longer useful to district. Dr. Evans.
Yes, the board has specific photos and information. Of course, as always, it's included on the website in the board packet for the public should they be interested. We have a number of pieces of equipment whose original costing was over the $5,000 threshold, and by policy it requires board action for us to dispose of that equipment. Before anyone has any qualms or fear, the equipment that we're talking about here goes back to the 50s and 60s, and they are machines that were used in our technical education department. These are not about reductions in facilities or programs. These materials have been replaced with brand new equipment that have been installed, mostly procured through grant funds, which is pretty exciting as well. So the equipment that's listed in your resolution and then also in the packet will be available through the government surplus website, which many state and federal organizations use, so the public would certainly be able to procure this equipment if they're handy and might want to fix something or might want to use a piece of forgery that I would love to see in operation in somebody's house if they ever get that far. But again, that's what we're looking at this evening is the authorization to dispose of equipment.
Where does the money that we get from the sale of this property go?
Yes, we would retain it within the department, in this case that it came from, so we'd be able to spin it right back into updates and additional equipment or materials for the tech ed department. We're really excited about some of the new pieces of equipment and program opportunity there as well. And as you see, this evening you had a $24,000 donation of lumber, which I believe we had another of equal amount or similar amount earlier in the year. So they, I think, have some good opportunities there.
I think in the list it did say 1943 for.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that and I was thinking a model or not, but I really do think that's a lathe from 1943. Yeah, my dad taught in this technical education area for almost 40 years, and I think I saw a lathe like that in his shop back when I was a kid. So
Yeah, that, I mean, for safety purposes, that feels like that equipment probably has seen its day. So, yeah, I think it's great. And the fact that we're using, that we've been able to secure grant funds for new tech ed equipment, I think it's amazing. But I appreciate that we're doing something responsible with trying to get rid of this rather than just throwing it away and going to the dump. So.
It's also nice that there's a government, the government surplus website takes care of, if somebody is interested, it does have an audience. So hopefully it can go to somebody who could potentially use it.
Alrighty, with that, we'll need a motion.
Your turn.
My turn? All right. Be it resolved that the Board of Education approve the disposal of the following technical education items: the 1950s to 1960s foundry and molds, 1943 lathe, 1953 Brown and Sharp mill, 1970 to 1980s Delta Rockwell wood jointer with straight blades, and 1959 Delta Rockwell wood joiner with a Helka cutter head upgrade. And be it further resolved that the funds received from the sale of this equipment be disposed or deposited for use by the high school technical education program.
I so move.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Reynolds, a second by Mr. Rogers. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's actually a roll call.
Roll call, geez, that's a roll call, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Mrs. Selly,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Bukta,
Yes.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mr. Nickram.
Yes. And
Be it resolved that the Board of Education approve the disposal of the Luther Elementary risers.
I'll second.
motion by Ms. Reynolds, a second by Ms. Sully, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mr. Rogers,
Yes.
Mrs. Selly,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Bukta,
Yes.
Mr. Nickram.
Yes. Alrighty, moving on, non-instruction item E, 2022-23 budget adjustments.
Yes, we have Mr. Demarath, our Director of Business Services, who will be working through item E as well as item F with us this evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Tonight I'll share the proposed 22-23 final budget. I'll also share some detail regarding the proposed referendum in 2 weeks and how the outcome of that referendum would affect the final budget and tax levy. I'm going to begin this evening with a reminder of where we began back in January and February as we learned about high inflationary impacts related to compensation and health insurance. In an effort to mitigate those impacts and set us up for the future, the board confirmed that we should move forward with these strategies, and it's important that we revisit them as we consider the budget this evening. Our strategies are to provide a competitive compensation and benefit package to our 1-4 team, right-sizing our team to align to enrollment and program needs, evaluating all vacancies for attrition or restructuring, analyzing programming to prioritize return on investment and recognizing opportunities for strategic abandonment, continue to engage the community regarding a potential capital investment and continue planning for an operational referendum, and strategically leverage our one-time federal ESSER COVID relief funds. As was mentioned at the annual meeting and as we finalize this year's budget and tax levy, each and every one of these strategies has been leveraged in our planning for this year and beyond. Over the past decade, the state has shifted public school funding away from a recurring revenue cap increase towards an annual per pupil aid amount. Both the revenue cap and per pupil aid amount that we receive is determined through each biennial budget. We can see the history of these two main sources of state revenue and their increases over the past 15+ years here. Over the last decade, any increase in these revenues has been hit or miss based on decisions made as part of the state budget process. In the current state budget, we see no increase in allowable revenue from the state for local public schools. At a few points throughout my presentation this evening, I'll be referencing a May 2022 publication from the nonpartisan Wisconsin Policy Forum entitled Uncharted Waters to provide a state-level context for what we're experiencing here locally in Fort Atkinson. In that publication, they state the following, quote, Pointing to the large influx of federal aid, lawmakers opted to limit state and local revenues to districts for both the 2022 school year and 2023. The 2021-23 state budget provided no increase in either year in state revenue limits, which cap the amount the school districts can raise through local property taxes and state general school aids combined, end quote. What the state has done in the current 2-year budget is something that we try to stay away from as a practice to ensure recurring resources support recurring expenses for our programs and services. As the state desired, however, using our federal funds to offset this revenue shortfall was one of the strategies I mentioned earlier that we are using this year. What is shown here is the final student full-time equivalency, or FTE count, that's used for revenue limit purposes, which has a large impact on our funding each year. You can see the prior 2 years as well as what we were projecting this summer. We finalized this count in September, and as you can see, we were not too far off from our projection when it comes to the total revenue limit FTE at the bottom here. Another part of our pupil count that's outside the revenue limit but also impacts our budget is the number of students open enrolling into and out of our district. As illustrated here, for the first time since 2018-19, the gap between the number of students coming in and those going out has widened, resulting in nearly $95,000 increase in our net revenue from open enrollment. What the board's considering tonight is approving the changes to the revenue and expenditure budgets for this year since the approval of the preliminary budget at the annual meeting in August. So we'll start with a summary of the major changes in our operating revenue, totaling a decrease in revenue of just under $2.19 million. As part of our budget planning this summer, the $3 million in operational referendum funds was included as part of our preliminary budget so we could understand its impact as decisions were being made about the referendum. In these budget adjustments, those referendum funds are removed as we do not yet have the authority for them. Should the operational referendum be successful in 2 weeks, a budget adjustment following Election Day would be submitted to the board for consideration to restore this revenue in the budget. The second line is related to one-time ARPA funds, or American Rescue Plan Act funds. These are the federal funds Governor Evers has decided to pass along to public schools this year at his discretion. The next line is an increase in interest earnings given the rapidly rising interest rates and their potential impact on our investment balances. On October 14th, we received our state aid certification, which allowed all of these budget changes to take place. You can see that our estimate of state aid was slightly higher than what was certified this month. The final few lines include adjusting grant funding to match expenses and awards, adjusting open enrollment revenue based on our September pupil count, and other minor state aid and miscellaneous adjustments. Here we see the major changes in our operating expense budget, totaling an overall increase of $360,000. Here, the first item is adding the carryover of unexpended funds from the prior fiscal year, including any unspent grant funds. The second item is related to truing up our salary and benefit expenses to who is actually in place to begin the school year and their actual pay and benefit costs. The third item is the increase in private school voucher payments as a pass-through on our tax levy, which I'll share more about shortly. The next item is the required operating transfer to cover special education costs not covered by state aid or federal funds. Next, as you may recall from a prior board meeting, the board approved a loan from fund balance to cover the cost of replacing staff devices in conjunction with some federal funds for this purpose. This loan has been added to this year's expense budget. The final items are related to adjusting our payments to 4-year-old kindergarten providers based on enrollment, adjusting what we pay other districts for our students open enrolling out, and then other miscellaneous expense adjustments of smaller amounts. Let's now take a look at how these revenue and expense adjustments impact the bottom line of the operating budget. Here you can see the prior 2 years' revenues, expenses, and surpluses, along with what was approved as a preliminary budget at the annual meeting. A reminder that preliminary budget did include the $3 million operational referendum. As I mentioned earlier, those referendum dollars have been removed for this final budget approval, which is highlighted here in yellow. As you can see, without that operational referendum, this year's budget deficit is $581,000 as opposed to the surplus we were planning with the referendum. If we build that referendum back into the budget, you can see the impact that it has in the last column on this table. Some may ask why the referendum is for $3 million when we have a deficit of $580,000. I'll offer that we are always taking a long-term approach to our budget planning, and the surplus in this year and prior years is projected to help offset future budget deficits, given the referendum posed in 2 weeks is for the next 4 years. So while there may be a surplus now, if the referendum is successful, expense increases are projected to outpace revenue increases, resulting in the need to use that surplus down the road to offset deficits. As a result of our work over the past year and everything that was outlined this evening, we see our proposed final tax levy. With the $3 million operational referendum removed at this point, our total tax levy would decrease 12.23%, resulting in the deficit I just shared. This tax levy would also include a referendum-approved debt levy of just over $518,000, which is what we have remaining to pay off all of our outstanding long-term debt. So the highlighted column here is the tax levy without either of the referendum questions built into the budget being approved this evening, as that is what we currently have the authority to do. The final column here is with both successful referendums built into the tax levy, as we have been planning all along. You can see the $3 million more in the general fund tax levy for operations, along with an increase in the referendum debt taxes to put towards the $22 million capital referendum debt should that question be successful. Overall, as we've been planning and sharing, at the very bottom you can see that the public school tax rate remains stable at $10.36 per $1,000 of value, with both referendum questions being successful. And with the private school voucher taxes, we see a levy rate of $10.95. This graph further illustrates the tax rate impact of the upcoming referendum, as well as the impact of private school vouchers on the tax rate. You can see that the public school tax rate has remained stable since 2018-19 and would remain stable under the referendum questions on the ballot in 2 weeks. In fact, it's lower than the tax rate over a decade ago. However, over the past few years, the private school voucher part of the tax rate, as shown in red, has continued to increase. This year, that part of the tax rate has increased slightly, as we are now over $1.2 million in local private school vouchers being funded as a pass-through on the tax levy. That's an increase over last year of about $200,000. As we have shared before, we get no information whatsoever about how many students are using private school vouchers or are projected to use private school vouchers, and we don't know how much to add to the tax levy until the state gives us these numbers in mid-October. Again, this year, just like the past few, the only increase in the local tax rate is due to private school vouchers. I've talked quite a bit about the referendum this evening that's 2 weeks away and how it aligns with the budget and tax levy being proposed this evening. So I just want to quickly recap what is on the ballot in 2 weeks. Through our management of debt and the full retirement of that debt on the horizon, coupled with an increase in state aid without a revenue limit increase, we're able to pose these 2 referendum questions and maintain a stable public school tax rate this year. To summarize the total referendum package being proposed for November 8th, on the capital side, we would install secure entries and address urgent maintenance needs at all 6 of our buildings, as well as improve traffic flow at the high school site as the new neighborhood comes online over there, for a total cost of $22 million financed through 20-year bonds. On the operational side, we have 1 question with 2 parts. The first part is for $3 million recurring beginning this year, and the second part is for $4 million non-recurring in 23-24 and 24-25, and then $5 million non-recurring in 25-26. I'll note that through this referendum, we're asking voters permission to levy up to those amounts. So these would be maximums that we could levy, but as the financial environment changes over the next 4 years, the board could consider levying less than those amounts accordingly. In addition to these referendum questions on the ballot in 2 weeks, we'll continue to plan a message for a referendum in November of 2026 to build a new middle school. I want to stress again that it's our intention to keep the public school portion of the tax rate stable over the course of this referendum through 25-26. Now that we have final numbers from the state for this year, as I've shared, that would be the case for this year should the 2 referendum questions be successful on November 8th. We also want to be completely transparent and upfront about what that means when we say that it's our intention to maintain a stable tax rate for district operations. So what does that mean for the local homeowner or taxpayer? It means that if a home's value increases, the school taxes on that property will increase accordingly. It also means that if there's an increase in the cost of private school vouchers, just as I showed this evening, the total tax rate and taxes on the homeowner's property will increase as well. This portion of our school tax levy is simply a pass-through mechanism for the local taxpayer to pay for private school vouchers. So while it's our full intention for the tax rate for public school operations to remain stable this year and the following 3 years, these 2 factors will impact how a property owner's tax bill changes from year to year. And why do we need to ask the community for referendum funding like we are in 2 weeks? What is shown here is a graph from that Wisconsin Policy Forum publication that illustrates the percentage change in CPI, or inflation, against a percentage change in state-controlled revenue sources for schools. To explain this graph, I'll use what is shared in that publication. Quote, in the 1990s and 2000s, the annual per pupil increase in state revenue limits closely tracked the rate of inflation. In fact, from 1999 to 2009, state law linked the increase in revenue limits to the change in CPI. The percentage change in the state revenue limit by school year has rarely deviated by more than 1 percentage point from the rate of inflation. Consumer prices rose 4.7% in 2021 over the previous year, and inflation has accelerated since then. This increase especially matters since under state law, the base wage increases allowed in teachers' union contracts are tied to the percentage change in CPI. The wages and benefits of teachers and other staff represent the single largest cost for school districts, and boosting pay will be difficult without increases in their ongoing state and local revenues. Yet districts also fear staffing challenges if they fail to do so, end quote. As was just shared over the past few slides and through those strategies that were outlined at the beginning of the presentation, our district is committed to making strategic financial moves to ensure we are able to attract and retain high-quality team members to serve our community, even with the limitations that have been put on our resources by the state. However, there is also a long-term need to meet the gap shown here, which is where the operational referendum comes into play. Also contained in that publication is this graph that shares, as they state, quote, since the beginning of 2016, 312 of the 421 K-12 school districts in Wisconsin, or 74.1%, have passed at least one referendum, and 164, or 39%, have passed more than one. With state limits on school revenue remaining tight in recent years, districts around the state have turned to voter referenda to raise their local property taxes and spending. On the right, as was highlighted this week, in calendar 2022, a record number of school districts in Wisconsin are going to referendum for operations to exceed the revenue limit, 92 out of the 421 districts. So we certainly are not alone in asking our community to make up that gap between increasing costs and no state-allowed revenue increases. Now I want to share what happens with the budget and tax levy from here, given this year is a bit different with our November 8th referendum. Tonight, the board will certify 4 different tax levies based on the potential outcomes of the referendum election in 2 weeks. I'll share those next. November 8th is Election Day, where our 2 referendum questions are on the ballot. Based on the reported results of that election, on Wednesday I will work with Mr. Rogers to certify whichever of the 4 tax levies is appropriate based on the outcome of the votes, and that information will be sent to our 9 local municipalities by Thursday, November 10th. What is shown here are the 4 tax levy resolutions for the board to consider based upon what would happen with the tax levy as a result of the outcome of the November 8th referendum. With 2 questions, there are 4 possible outcomes of both questions passing, the capital question passing and the operational question failing, the operational question passing and the capital question failing, or both questions failing on November 8th. You can see that the first two outcomes result in the same tax levy because should the operational question fail, we would put an additional $3 million on the debt levy for the capital projects in order to pay down the $22 million faster in preparation for another operational question being posed in April 2023 to the community. Should either or both questions fail in 2 weeks, we'll be back in the spring as our operational and capital needs are not going away. That concludes my presentation of the 22-23 proposed final budget. Before you is a resolution to enact the budget changes, as well as the 4 resolutions I just shared to set the tax levy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Demerath. Lots going on there. We certainly appreciate all the information and all the information you've provided the board. I think throughout this process, it's the first time for all of us going through a referendum, and I think you've done a really nice job of keeping us all informed and in touch what's going on. Obviously, although you made a presentation right in front of us, we as a board, we've been working on making sure we fully understand what's going on here, and you've done a really nice job. So thank you for that. Just a quick comment. I know a few months ago I mentioned that I think we've done a really nice job of controlling what we can control, and your presentation tonight confirmed exactly that, that we don't control home values or inflation or things like that. We can control our tax rate, and I think we've done a really nice job of keeping that stable. So it's very well detailed out here for the questions, but not sure if anyone else has any comments on his presentation tonight.
How often can we go to referendum for operational needs or reasons?
We can ask 2 referendum questions per calendar year. And then that's 2 referendum questions, whether they be operational or capital. It's only 2 questions per year on regular election dates.
And if they pass, is there any restriction at that point?
As to whether or not we go back for another
Yeah.
one, the state law only allows school districts to ask 2 referendum questions per calendar year,
Whether they pass or not?
whether they pass or not.
Okay.
I just want to go back to, can we go back to slide 10, please?
Can you tell me? Oh, here we go. Numbers at the bottom.
Keep going.
There.
Yes. I want to see, this is really, from like 2019, our tax rate has been pretty stable for the public schools. But I want to point out this red line there, that's the private school vouchers. So when we're asking for these referendums and, we're keeping things stable. And what's really going up is the private school vouchers. Is that correct?
On the tax rate, yes, it's the private school vouchers that's created that increase over the past few years.
That just, yeah. And on slide 14, I know I'm making you go back and forth.
That's all right. This one?
Yes.
Okay.
That 92 referendums to exceed revenue limits, that's crazy for our state to have all of these public schools needing and asking taxpayers for more money when you can see they're not filtering the money down to the students that really need it.
And it's my understanding there's a $4.3 billion budgetary surplus this year.
Yeah. Where is that? We obviously
I know
need it,
where it's not.
right? It's
Yeah.
not here. So that's crazy that just how many districts are having to go to referendum. That just absolutely blows my mind. Has that ever been this way? I don't remember it ever being this way as long as I've been alive.
No.
The 92
Yeah.
in one calendar year is a record.
Yeah, it's crazy that we have to continue. So many districts are going through the exact same thing.
In short, the answer to your question is no, there have not been more in a year, and I know the projection for April is equal, if not greater, at this point as well. I think most of us are watching other districts' agendas and business going on in other school districts, and there are a number of districts entertaining questions for April this month or next, as they need to make those decisions in short order if they're going to take questions to the electors in the next election. So there were districts, as you can see, that made the choice to go to ask for a capital question this fall. And then there are many that are waiting to go in April as well.
But I want to make it, I guess I just want to clarify. Going to referendum is not a loophole. It's not like trying to circumvent, we're given X amount and we just want to be greedy and want more. Going to referendum is whether you think the legislature should give us more money or not, going to referendum is designed by the legislature saying, go to your local community and ask for the amount that you need to operate. Isn't that kind of, what is being used as you don't have enough to operate, you can cut programs, you can cut, that's your option, or your other option is to go. It's not a loophole. Referendum is kind of where the legislature has been saying, this is how you get more money. Is that accurate? And that's why there's so many?
Yeah, I think the way you're describing it is the way that many would, which is, districts, especially with a 0% increase in the last biennial budget, that definitely is encouraging school boards to go back to the electorate for operational referendum to augment what is not coming from the state to offset costs related to providing quality education. So it really has created a mechanism by which, and I think that's why you're seeing the number now, and you'll see that number in April as well, is that districts are at the point where they're needing to exercise that mechanism to get the funds they need, since they aren't coming from somewhere else. And that's making the appeal to the electorate. And in comments I've made in other places, we've never taken that for granted, and we've always attempted, I think, as Mr. Demarath mentioned, perhaps briefly tonight, but at length in other occasions, the reason we are able to keep the tax rate as we are is because we have prepaid debt, and we have done a number of other things preventatively, so that we be in a position to entertain both of these referendum questions with that tax rate remaining stable. So perhaps that's not exactly your point, but that is what districts are being caused to do, which is go to referendum. It has nothing to do with how well districts have or haven't managed funds or anything else. And if anything, I think our track record is really solid in that regard. But it is what districts are being asked to do out of necessity.
And we might be able to, nickname you Mr. Demograph, because you present a lot of graphs. And you do it. I do want to, on one graph, stable tax rates that with the two referendums, if they pass, the stable tax rate, that doesn't, I just want to, lots of information presented. I want to make sure I understand and have this point clarified. Stable tax rate does not equal my bill in December is going to be what it was last year. Does not equal no change in my taxes, right?
Right, your change in your taxes would be basically based on your change in property value.
Yeah, okay.
And private vouchers.
Yeah, with the private voucher increase on the tax rate there as well.
Okay, so it's like I go to the grocery store and I go to the store and the tax rate doesn't change, it's 5.5%. But if I buy more clothes, then my bill is going to go up. So, okay.
And we've been very transparent for over a year, that stable tax rate does not necessarily equal no additional tax cost. You know, and the number of variables depending on, you know, where you own a home and what other municipalities are doing and those types of things, it's really not possible for us to provide firm numbers for people as we have in the past, simply because those variables are so varied depending on the actual locations of one's home.
And all of that information is with the passing of both referendums that the tax rate remains the same as last year. Both the operational, which is just our normal general operating costs, and the capital, which is necessary maintenance needs and secure entrances and stuff. That's right.
Right, the overall tax rate, including private school vouchers, increases by 3 cents because of the private school vouchers, but the public school tax rate remains the same as last year.
Which is a number we know. We know the private school voucher number that's been given to us now,
Yeah, that was just given to us about a week and a half ago.
which is essentially the state saying, you know, tack on 30 cents, 36 cents. What, I think is it 39 or 36?
59 cents.
Oh, 59, I'm sorry. I'm making school vouchers go down. Okay, so that's just given to us, as far as here's add this one.
Right.
All right, just lots of really important information, so I just want to really clarify all this to simplify it for my simple mind.
Do you want me to make all 4 motions or just one resolution at a time?
We actually need to start with the budget adjustments.
Yep, so we'll start with item E, we'll go one by one. The 2022-23 budget adjustments. Obviously, we don't have to read this, we can put as written here, unless you feel.
No, so moved.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Rogers, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Bukta?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes. And now we move on to item F, certification of tax levy.
Well, I guess this is what my question was.
And then Mr. Demerath, would you mind addressing his question?
I would say to read each one individually.
one?
Yeah, and
And
pass
take
each,
separate action.
and take
Yeah.
separate
Okay.
action on each one.
Here it goes. Be resolved that the tax to fund the 2022-23 school district budget be set at $22,372 and $372,174, and that the necessary certification of said levy be forwarded to the clerk of the city of Fort Atkinson and the clerk of each of the appropriate townships. I so moved.
I'll second.
Most members, Mr. Rogers, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Bukta?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes. All right, no. Second one?
So the capital question passes, operational question fails.
Correct.
Be it resolved, that's the one, yep. Be it resolved that the tax to fund the 2022-23 school district budget be set at $22,362,174, and that the necessary certification of said levy be forwarded to the clerk of the city of Fort Atkinson and the clerk of each of the appropriate townships.
I second.
A motion by Ms. Sully, a second by Ms. Bukta, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Bukta?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes.
Operational question passes, capital question fails. Be it resolved that the tax to fund the 2022-23 school district budget be set at $20,140,505, and that the necessary certification of said levy be forwarded to the clerk of the city of Fort Atkinson and the clerk of each of the appropriate townships.
Second?
Motion by Ms. Bukta, a second by Ms. Rogers, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Bookta?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes. And last one.
Both questions fail. Be it resolved that the tax fund in the 2022-23 school district budget be set at $17,140,505, and that the necessary certification of said levy be forwarded to the clerk of the city of Fort Atkinson and the clerk of each of the appropriate townships.
I'll second.
A motion by Ms. Selly, a second by Ms. Reynolds, and a roll call, Ms. Haas.
Mrs. Bookta?
Yes.
Mr. Rogers?
Yes.
Mrs. Selly?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mr. Nickram?
Yes. Alrighty, now we're moving on to item G, appointment of deputy clerk for certification of tax levy.
I can speak to that. So because we have to send whichever of the tax levy results from the actual referendum results, because the referendum happens on November 8th, and we have to send the tax levy to the municipalities by November 10th. On November 9th, I would have to pick whichever tax levy is appropriate based on election results and have somebody sign all the forms for municipalities to send them to them. And Mrs. Selly, as clerk, is out of town on business that week, and so Mr. Rogers would come in and sign under this resolution all those forms that need to be sent the next day.
Okay.
How do we get it to them? Is it regular mail fine or?
I've already alerted them that I'll be emailing them scanned versions that day, because they're notarized pages, so I'll email them scanned versions so they can at least use them as they start their work, but then I will mail the originals via the post office that day as well.
All right, we have a motion in front of us.
Be it resolved that the school board member Chris Rogers be appointed as deputy clerk for the purposes of certifying the tax levy.
I'll second.
Motion by Ms. Bookta, a second by Ms. Reynolds. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All right, moving on to items for future board meetings.
Yes, we'll have the Behavioral Mental Health Services Report, follow-up to the referendum coming up in just 2 short weeks, an election timeline review for school board elections. The board will receive the annual school safety drills report as required. We'll also be receiving the nutrition services report, as well as the potential for some course proposals, and then a strategic plan update as well.
All right, thank you. All right, and our last motion of the evening.
Move to adjourn.
I'll second.
A motion by Ms. Rogers, a second by Ms. Reynolds. All those in favor?
Aye.
And those opposed? All righty, concludes the meeting at 7:48 PM.